Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont. Somebody got into an argument with me the other day, if we can call it such, about whether or not Priscilla could defeat Rani, which is a foolish sentiment, because of course she can. Priscilla's feet are visible and Rani's are not, which means Priscilla's Miyazaki units are far greater. But that also got me thinking, if we took every lady from Demon's Souls, the Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Shadows Die Twice, and Elden Ring, who is the strongest? I thought about that for around 5 seconds before realizing that, oh, Marika is the next thing to a god, if not a god outright, so no doubt she takes the cup. Still, I think it's an interesting topic and one that is sure to generate lots of arguments and people insulting me in the comments, so why not make a video on it? And no, we won't be including Gwendolyn, and yes, I did make a video a little like this a few years back, Souls Mighty Maidens, although that was A, not really about power level discussion, B, we've had 290 Souls games since then. Well, to kick things off, we need to boil it down to the strongest female from each title. Demon's Souls. We have quite a few good prospects here. Selen Vinland, Executioner Marauder, Mephistopheles, Saint Astraea, and of course, the Maiden in Black, to name a few. Frankly, I think we can rule out the Saint, as she's rather fragile, hence her need for Garl. So even if she possesses a demon's soul which may be powerful, she herself, I think, is not. Likewise, the Maiden in Black appears to be very powerful, given that she can't die, for one thing, and what the game tells us about her. Whether or not you believe her to be some extension of the old one, however, we never see any feats. We're never told, really, of her feats, unless we're assuming some other feats can be attributed to her from other mysterious demons. Marauder imprisoned Yuria, and she does have quite a brutal reputation, but she's still largely a human, so far as we can tell. At any rate, I can't find a clear winner here other than, likely, the Maiden, although again, we never see her fight. The game does describe her as once being one of the oldest, most dangerous demons. Is that still the case? Who knows? But we do know that Soulsucker, the magic from her soul, is quite powerful, so I think it's fair to give it to her, but if you want to make a case for Marauder or anyone else, I'm sure I could be swayed. Dark Souls. I'll tell you right off the bat, my favourite girl in Dark Souls 1 is Sieglind, Little Lyn the Onion Knight. Probably not the strongest. The bravest? Maybe. If we're looking at feats, Lyn survived Lordran as a human, as in one life and no do-overs, all to find her father. Suddenly puts her as a competent adventurer. On the flip side, we have the female gods, Velka and Guinevere, but their feats are hard to attribute. Yes, they are gods, which presumably gives them far greater power than mortals, but here's the thing, presumably. People hear the word god and immediately think that equates to unlimited or extreme power, even if that isn't always the case. None of these games have omnipotent nor omniscient deities, with the possible exception of Demon's Souls where there are a few mentions to God, but even that is quite vague. So discounting gods and humans, well, we have everything in between. There's Priscilla, Lord's Blade Kieran, Quelana, maybe Sif, if we're counting dogs, but we're not going to count dogs. Priscilla is possibly the child of a god, and Quelana's mother was the Witch of Izalith, certainly a godlike figure in Dark Souls. Of course, Quelana is quite weak if you decide to just bonk her. Quelaag is a boss, whereas the third, unnamed sister we can encounter, the Fair Lady, is also extremely weak. Lord's Blade Kieran and the Dark Moon Knight, those are good guesses too, as they are presumably quite strong fighters. I mean, Lord's Blade Kieran is one of Gwyn's 4 knights, after all, so you could well say she's only one step below Gwyn, maybe. But I think the best bet here is Priscilla, who isn't exactly a renowned fighter, so to speak. She doesn't have the skill of Lord's Blade Kieran or the Dark Moon Knight, but she has very interesting powers, the power of invisibility, and more importantly, Life Hunt, an ability feared even by the gods. Is the Life Hunt just an extremely powerful bleed? Is it related to occult? Occult weapons were used to hunt gods, but that doesn't necessarily mean Life Hunt is occult, just that both are dangerous to the gods and locked away in the Painted World. Still, Priscilla also has a size advantage going for her, so we'll give her the crown for Dark Souls 1, but as with Demon Souls, this isn't very solid, and I could probably be swayed to thinking, oh, it was Kieran or someone else. Dark Souls 2. The Emerald Herald is the best girl, evidently. That doesn't mean she's the strongest. Xiaohua is a cat, and seemingly immortal, but let's ignore that as she's a cat. If we're talking the humanoids, or mostly humanoid, we have various competent individuals. Lucatiel, Lycia, various summons and invaders. Bosses include the Lost Sinner and Mytha, but I think we're better off looking at Nishandra and Alana. Along with Nadalia and Alsana, they make up the Daughters of Manus, the Daughters of Dark. On the one hand, Vendrick describes Nishandra as a feeble, tiny thing, but this could just be how she presented herself to him. After all, the game also remarks that Nadalia bore inconceivable strength, and I think, by and large, there isn't much to stand between them. They are all roughly equivalent to one another. Of course, Alana, I think, has the ability to summon characters to help her during the boss fight, but Nishandra is a manifestation of want. Whether or not greed is a stronger emotion than wrath, fear, or solitude is up to you, but I believe they are largely interchangeable characters in terms of characteristics and strength. For the sake of simplicity, we'll use Chandra. Dark Souls 3. This is actually the easiest for me to give an answer to. Sister Frieda. Not my favourite of the Dark Souls 3 characters, but I believe she is stronger than any other, including the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, Yorshka, Shira, Cirrus, and so on. I'm gonna give Shira a special shout out just because she hits you with a stick that has a pygmy strapped to it, which is ridiculous. However, Elfrida is no god, no great manifestation of dark, but she does have quite a plan going for her, and quite the level of strength to manifest. Sister to Yuria and Lillian, all three are famed fencers. Yuria is said to have claimed 100 lives with Dark Drift, and they formed a church between just the three of them. They followed a primordial serpent, presumably Karth, who may have bestowed other blessings. Elfrida, the oldest sister, uses a powerful scythe that not only uses frost to great effect, but suggests a possible affinity with Priscilla. Bizarrely, Frieda also wields Black Flame. It smoulders within her. Does this suggest, unlike the Ashen One, she is kindled from the Abyss in some manner? Given her connection with the primordial serpent, could be the case, as black flames in Dark Souls are typically associated with the Abyss, said to be the impenetrable fires of humanity. Or in another sense, you could say they might channel the power of the Dark Soul itself. Frieda here was ahead of the ball. She knew how good wielding two different elements would be in Elden Ring, clearly. So she is our pick. I have to give an honourable mention to Little Heretic Carla, who I still maintain is another daughter of Manus in some capacity. Bloodborne. As with Dark Souls 3, we have multiple options here, but I think the answer, had I put it to a poll, would be fairly unanimous. Lady Maria. I know Eileen is popular, and some will make cases for the doll, but really the only competition I see for Maria would be Ebritas. Is the Moon Presence female? Is Murgo's Wet Nurse female? Well, if we take Flora as the name for the Moon Presence, maybe. If you want to make that argument, sure, in which case it comes down to Maria or the Moon Presence, but again, we're going to stick with mostly humanoids. Given the Moon Presence is a big noodly thing, I'm going with Maria for the sake of convenience. But I knew someone was going to bring up Moon Presence or Ibritas. Maria was one of the first students of Gehrman, the first hunter, and is distantly related to Queen Annalise. Curiously, Maria seems to have a preference for eschewing any blood-related abilities, and focused entirely on a weapon that demanded extreme amounts of skill and dexterity. But when pushed, she will unleash flaming blood slashes that perhaps stem from her Cainhurst heritage. Rather reminds me of a certain Omen King and his cursed blood. Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. What do you think? Lady Butterfly, the corrupted monk, Emma? I'll tell you right now that had we ever gotten a DLC for this game, it would have certainly been Tomoe. But going by the characters we encounter actually in the game, I think it comes down to Lady Butterfly and the corrupted monk, realistically. How do we compare them? Well, one amusing thing I noticed, Butterfly is of course worth less experience considering you fight Yao's true form at the end of the game, but in New Game Plus appears that Lady Butterfly is worth more. Still, I think that Priestess Yao has the advantage here. For one thing, she's immortal. There's some rather compelling evidence that Yao, who reached the Fountainhead Palace, is 800 years old. And if you fought her, you know she's pretty good, even if you can get in some sneak attacks on her. Elden Ring. Once again we have an extremely obvious answer. Queen America the Eternal. Still, let's discount her for a moment. We could say she doesn't count because she's also Radagon, who's not a female. Or maybe because the Elden Beast is like maybe inside her and that's a beast, not a humanoid. Meh. But discounting her, however, just so we have something to talk about, we're still left with a pretty obvious figure. Malenia, Blade of Mikola. She who can bloom into the goddess of rot. And even if we discount her, we still have her daughters, such as Millicent. We have Selen, Renala, Rani, all competent sorcerers. Then there's Latenna, Tish, Eleonora, Loretta, Siluria, Nefeli Lu. In fact, I think Elden Ring's ladies could probably take on all of the others combined and come out on top, even without Marika. There's a lot of them. Many of them have significant strength or special powers. For the sake of this video, we'll go with Malenia as our strongest lady from Elden Ring, as we have undeniable evidence of her feats. Although by the time this video is out, Shadow of the Erdtree might be out and we've probably learned a lot more about Marika and maybe DLC characters too, but well, it's not out right now. So although yes, she is probably stronger than Malenia, for the sake of this video, we will go with Malenia. So now we just need to figure out who is the strongest of these champions. Judging from Elden Ring's quality and quantity, you might think this is all rather a foregone conclusion. Malenia sweeps. No. The Maiden in Black, Priscilla, Nashandra, Elfrida, Lady Maria, Priestess Yao, and Malenia. First up, do any of them have any type advantages over the others? None of them are immune to poison, with the possible exception of Lady Maria, as poison is very different in Bloodborne. But given she has 999 resistance, I think we can say she's effectively immune, or at least highly resistant to it. Priscilla has a resistance to it, Nashandra is weak to it. None of the other ladies particularly use elements outside of blood, fire and dark. Most of them are weakest to lightning, even if they're not super vulnerable to it, with the exception of Malenia, who is weakest to fire. Nashandra and Elfrida is the most interesting example here. Nashandra uses dark attacks, which Frida is weak to. Nashandra is resistant to fire, which Frida uses. Chandra also has curses. We don't know the curse resistance of any of the other ladies. The nearest we have is Malenia's immunity to Death Blight and Madness. She is a demigod after all, and you could argue that translates into a resistance to curses. I do think Nashandra's curse and such means she has a distinct advantage over Frida. Of course, you can kind of stop Nashandra's curses if you break her balls. Meanwhile, the monk and the Maiden in Black enjoy forms of immortality. The Maiden in Black, well, it's very hard to talk about her as she just stands around most of the time. All we really know is that once she was very powerful, and her soul contains the secrets of Soul Suck, which is very powerful. But the monk is immortal. Wolf is able to defeat her using Gracious Tears, the mortal blade. Do any of the others here have the means to sever immortality? Priscilla might, if you choose to believe a life hunt is something that can kill or harm gods and immortals. I think it is reasonably fair to assume life hunt could sever immortality, but we don't have any evidence to support that. But even if all of the others can't kill the monk, Frida, for example, could incinerate her to the point where she would be alive, but not really in any state to fight. And you don't need to kill your opponent to beat them, after all. I think the monk would do well against Nishandra if the curses don't affect her, and maybe against Lady Maria. Speaking of Lady Maria, her blood flames would serve her well against Melania and potentially Frida, who can bleed as well. Frida versus Lady Maria is an interesting one, which could honestly go either way. I think Maria has the slight advantage there. I also think Maria would fare well against Priscilla. For one thing, being invisible doesn't really help that much when Maria can throw blood and fire all over the place, something she could do against Frida too, for that matter. As for Priscilla versus Frida, maybe they'd just both go invisible and hide. But I think Frida has the slight edge, even if she is sort of not a descendant of Priscilla, but a spiritual successor. She took some inspiration from Priscilla and the painted world of Ariamis. The real question is, can any of them beat Melania? Even if several of them are immune or resistant to poison, from a gameplay perspective, Melania barely even uses Rot. It's just a nuke she can potentially whip out to cause a stalemate in some instances. Her skill with a blade and her uncanny, unexplained, potentially nonsensical ability to heal herself by smacking people are the biggest issues. Does anyone have the capability to flow through her waterfowl dance and strike at her weaknesses? Maria and Frida are small and fast enough where they could, in theory, do that. Priestess Yao, the corrupted monk, is probably too big to do that. Again, Tomoe could definitely do that. So Maria and Frida probably have the best chances. Both are agile enough to potentially avoid the flurry, both use fire, which Melania is weak to. Maria has powerful blood abilities, which probably translate to hemorrhage against Melania, if you ask me, in the same way that Melania's rot would translate to poison and quick poison in Bloodborne. Melania has no type advantages against the others, other than Nishandra being weak to poison. There's actually a lot of really interesting matchups here. There's no clear winner who completely sweeps all the others. Melania is definitely the one to beat, but I think Frida, whose Black Flames may translate to the god-slaying Black Flames in Elden Ring, and Maria have a good shot. She also kind of lucked out that Blood and Fire are good against pretty much everyone here. Could she defeat the monk, whose only real special power is some sort of mist manipulation, both in creating mist clones like the one you fight in the village and blanketing an area in mist to strike from? Maybe. Can she kill the monk? Probably not. In fact, it's funny, come to think of it, that Frida, Priscilla, and the monk all have some kind of stealth or invisibility. To summarize the video, they're actually surprisingly more evenly matched than I was expecting them to be. Melania, Frida, and Maria are the best kind of all-rounders here, and also Frida and Maria I think have a pretty good chance of defeating Melania. If we look at both their capabilities and their feats, Melania is a nigh unmatched warrior, Maria was Gehrman's prize student, Frida a founder of the Sable Church. Of the three, Melania likely has the most practical experience in fighting on both large and small scales, and against extremely strong opponents. Maria most likely has fought strong opponents because she fought beasts, whereas Elfrida, we know that she is very good at fighting, but if she's mostly been fighting knights and hollows, you see what I'm saying? Although I suppose Elfrida is technically a kind of ashen one of her own variety, so maybe that means she has the potential to fight and defeat the Lords of Cinder. Well, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know if you'd like to see any more content in this style. Till next time, thanks so much for watching, see you soon.